As part of our employer standards analysis, we identified that applications from young people do not always match the expectations of our employers. To address this gap, we have 3 of our South Yorkshire Cornerstone Employers, Laura Senior from Gripple, Caroline Lee from Volker Rail and Jessie O'Sullivan from Arup, sharing their top 5 tips for making a successful application.
Hi, I'm Laura Senior. I work for the People and Culture team here at Gripple, and our job is to bring new people into the business.
Hi, my name's Caroline Lee and I'm Senior Social Value Advisor at Volker Rail.
Hi, I'm Jessie O'Sullivan. I am a civil engineer at Arup Sheffield.
I think the first tip I would give somebody is to really understand the company that you're applying for. So I would do your research, see if you can find out what their values are, and if you can tailor your covering letter to match that, then absolutely you should try and do that if you can. And then the second thing I would advise people to do is please don't be afraid to let your personality shine through. When you write these covering letters, show who you are. This is your introduction to the company. You need to be the one that stands out from the crowd. So if you're funny, if you've got humour, absolutely let it shine through in your covering letter.
I would say take your time, make sure you've read what the job description is, make sure you know what's required of you. Take some time to look at our website, because on there you can find out what we do as a company, but we've also got pages where you can find out other people that are in a similar position to yourself that's doing in early careers, and just really make sure that you put everything in there that's really relevant to the role and what makes you stand out against other people.
So I would say the first step is to read the job advert, make sure you're entirely clear on what the job advert requires you to produce for the application, as well as what the role entails. And then the second step I would say is to make sure you thoroughly research the company. So at Arup, we appreciate it when people reference our values, our founder, and a project that has particularly resonated with you. So that could be a project in your local area or a project that you find particularly inspiring. And including that in your answer really helps us to know that you've got to know us as a company and that you're really passionate about the role.
So a good application form, make sure the information you include is relatable to the job, but also personal to you. So any hobbies or interests that you have that are relatable to the job, absolutely you should include them. And the second bit of advice I would give you is to read the job specification and what's been required of you really carefully. They may ask for more than just your CV and your covering letter. They might also ask for a portfolio of work, for example. So please pay attention to detail, and if they have asked, please make sure you provide that. You don't want to fall at the first hurdle.
So you want to make sure that you've got all details about your qualifications, what you've done at school, all your extracurricular activities, because sometimes that's how we can set you aside from other people, your hobbies and interests, especially if they're relevant to what you're trying to do. And then if there's any gaps, just make sure you explain the gaps. Now, when you're early education, it might not be that case, but if you ever get to the situation where there is, you just want to make sure there's a reason why there's a gap there.
I would say it's important to use different examples for all the questions, so it's good to have a wide range of experience to talk about. So that can be from school, from outside of school and your hobbies, or from work experience. And then the next step I would say is to be as reflective as you can be. So within your experience, cover what happened, what you learnt from it, and what you would do differently next time. You've got to show us what you would like to do with your future and what steps you want to take to get there and how we could help you do that.
So less is more, okay? I think some people sometimes can put too much information in their application. So when you get to the end of it, I would just double check that everything you've included is relevant. And like I said, less is more sometimes. So as long as you're providing exactly the right detail that you need, then that's how I would fine tune an application.
So when you're doing your application, I would prepare it and then I would get somebody that's not you to look it over, because sometimes you can look it over and you'll miss things. And one of the things you want to really make sure is you've not got like spelling errors, punctuation errors, any error, inaccuracies and things like that. So sometimes just getting somebody else, like a teacher or a parent, just have another look to make sure that they're finding anything that you might have missed.
So I would say the most important thing is to make sure you have proofread your application. Make sure that your application is concise, but also ensure that you haven't repeated yourself anywhere. We like to see different examples in all your questions, but again, make sure that your application reads well altogether. And I would say, where possible, make reference to specific company terms or language. So yeah, refer to the values that we have, as I mentioned before, but make sure you include those in a way that properly links with your answers, make sure everything flows.
Shortlisting process at Gripple is quite simple. Once you've submitted your application, you will then potentially be invited to a screening call. Once you've successfully completed a screening call, you may be invited to a first interview. Potentially there could be a second interview depending on the role. And also, if there is more than one vacancy for a particular role, you may be invited to an assessment centre. That would be alongside other applicants, and that's a day where you can really showcase your strengths, take part in activities and things like that.
So if it's for an apprenticeship, we do something called an assessment day. So everyone that applies then gets assessed against criteria such as, have you got the right grades, are you in the right location, does your subject matters match what you're trying to apply for? And if it is, you're invited to an assessment day. Probably about 8 to 10 people at that assessment day. You'll all be taking part in activities and assessed in the same way, and then those that are shortlisted may get to a secondary interview to be able to finalise who gets the role. If it's for another role, it's generally a normal interview process, so the hiring manager will have criteria that they work through with HR to shortlist who they interview, and then an interview will either be a standard interview with just normal interview questions, or it will be some sort of practical activity and interview questions. So it could be some sort of presentation, but you'll be given that in advance. And what I would say for that is, whatever they give you, just understand what they're asking for you, and wherever possible, just try and personalise it. So when I did that, I had to do a presentation, and I used the company branding, and I used words like we and us so that they could visualise me being there, just little hints like that.
The first step is the online application form. So once you fill that in, your application will then be sifted, which means that we filter out applications just based off the basic requirements of the job advert. So for example, just to check that you have the right qualifications from school, number of GCSEs, A-levels, etc. And then from there, any applications that get sifted into our more promising pile, then you get invited to do an online psychometric test, which is something quite specific to Arup. We use an online platform to do this. This online platform offers practice tests. I would strongly recommend doing as many practice tests as you feel you need before completing the psychometric testing. We give you quite a long window to complete these tests, so there's no need to rush this step. This test just gives us an idea of your competencies alongside your application. The next step after the psychometric testing will be the hiring managers having a look through all the applications and deciding who to invite for an assessment centre. So an assessment centre is there's a bit more to it than just the interview. So there will be an interview, but there will also be a technical exercise and a case study. So these are both very related to the role, and this assessment centre structure applies to apprenticeships, graduates, experienced hires across our whole recruitment process. So your technical exercise and your case study are always, as I said, very strongly linked to your roles. So you just got to make sure you understand what your role will entail and use that, and think a lot about that before coming into the assessment centre day. We also try to make sure that the case study is very topical, so make sure you're in touch with the news around your role and around the field that you're applying for. And lastly, we always invite you to ask questions at the end, so that will be to any current employees of us, if you want to find out more about what it's like to work at Arup, and also questions you can ask to the hiring managers. So this is where you really need to make sure you're prepared, as we really appreciate getting asked questions at the end of the assessment day.
Naturally, rejection is hard. Obviously, you will be disheartened. What I would say is, please don't be too disheartened. If you've got to the application stage and you've got to the interview stage, you should absolutely see that as a positive thing and actively seek that feedback, because there could be things that you don't know about that you need to improve. So actively seek that feedback from the business, use that to your advantage and put it into practice for the next time you apply for a role.
So if you are rejected for a role, I would always suggest that you ask for feedback from the employer. Most employers will give you that feedback. Now, sometimes it could be something that you didn't do, so maybe you didn't answer things in enough detail, or you didn't get involved as much. Sometimes it's a really awkward one where you were really great, but somebody else was even better. But what you would do with that feedback is look for ways in which you can improve things. I would also take a bit of time for yourself to reflect and feedback to yourself, because once you've done an interview, you'll know how well it went. And if there were areas where you think it needed a bit of improvement, just look into doing that. So it could just be how to make yourself more confident. It might be you didn't say things that you wanted to say at the interview, so maybe next time you take stuff and have things prepared, like some bullet points and things like that. But always ask for feedback. So we've got a HR system that will look at who's applied, who's been interviewed and who's been successful, and there will be a period of time where you're on that file system, so that if another opportunity came up, maybe the next month or two, and you apply again, we should be able to match that you've already been an applicant, but don't be afraid to mention that in your application. Similarly, if you've done anything with us, like you've seen us at a school event or you've done work experience with us, they're just other ways of showing. And I think what you really want to do is not just show that you're interested in a particular role or a job, but why you're interested in Volker Rail and why you would want to work with us specifically.
So I would say you should always request feedback. Our hiring managers keep thorough notes when they interview you, and these notes are always available for you to request following receiving the rejection. It's important that you take on board this feedback. Also at Arup, we operate a closed recruitment process. So we don't promise that we keep your details on file, but if you apply again with us, we have no record of you applying before, so it won't impact your chances when you reapply. But it's important that you make sure you take on board any feedback that you received and use this the next time around. So we operate a long recruitment window at Arup, so it's between September and February. So if you are rejected from a role earlier in the application window, you are more than welcome to apply again, especially if you receive positive feedback. It's often that we don't have enough roles for everybody, but we have many great candidates, so don't be disheartened. Give it another try, or you're more than welcome to wait till the next recruitment cycle if you'd like to build up a bit more experience before then. And I would also recommend applying as early as possible for any role that comes up during that window, as sometimes if we get a lot of great candidates, we can do assessment centres before the vacancy actually closes. So don't rush your application, but make sure you don't leave it till the last minute.